Chad was a typical little boy growing up. He was the oldest of 4 children. He loved his brother and his 2 sisters, and he loved to pick on them. He was involved in a lot of sports. He played baseball from the time he was 5 years old. He enjoyed competitive swimming. He was involved in the band program in school. He had a very, very good sense of humor.
Growing up, I had an older sister, Megan, a younger sister, Dawn, and C.H.A.D, who was, a handful of years older, 2 years older. And growing up, I guess we weren't too close. He had his friends, and my cousins, they were a little older. Sean and Gabriel would hang out with them. And growing up, I remember looking at my dad and seeing his relationship with my Uncle Craig and his brothers, and I remember thinking, one day, I'm not that close to my brother right now, but maybe later in life we'll have a relationship like my dad has with his brothers,
I guess one of them, when he was older, when he was 17, he had a Katana 600 motorcycle, and he wanted a Kawasaki KZX 1200 ZR, which was a pretty fast bike. But he would say, "You're not gonna buy that for me. I know you're not gonna buy that for me." But anyway, I ended up surprising him, and he came home, and I had it at home, and he was smiling pretty big, and it was just a fun experience seeing. Every time I saw him on that bike, he was always smiling. But there's a lot more experiences, but that's just one of the last experiences.
Something else I think about Chad whenever he was younger is fun-sized candy bars. They're about this big, and you see them a lot during the fall of the year. And the fall of the year really reminds me of Chad because he was so involved in the Halloween, the fair, his birthday. All of those things took place in October, and he would see the fun-sized candy bars, and he'd look at them and he said, "What's so fun about that? That's just enough to piss you off." He said, "Fun size are the king-size candy bars."
Last memory I have of Chad, my friend and I, and this is whenever we were living in Columbia, my friend and I were playing hide and go seek, and I asked him if he wanted to play. And at first he said, nah, I ain't gonna play. And then he came back like 5 minutes later. He said, okay, I'll play with y'all. So he played hide and go seek with us. And I remember she found me, and then we were going and we were trying to find Chad. So we walked over here, and we were like, oh crap, I think he's in here. So we opened up the cabinet, and he goes, rah! He scared the crap out of us. So yeah, that was the last memory I have of him.
I remember that he talked about trying out for the high school baseball team, and was going to go after school to try out for baseball. And if I'm not mistaken, it was either his freshman or his sophomore year, probably his sophomore year. And so after school that afternoon, I went to pick him up, and I was watching the boys practice on the baseball field, and I was looking, and I couldn't find him anywhere. And I was like, I can't believe I can't pick my son out of the crowd. And so I was looking around, and after a while, all the boys started coming off the field and were getting ready to leave, and I heard this banging on the back of my car, and I turned around. It was Chad in the opposite direction. And he came and got in the car, and I'm like, what are you doing? I said, you didn't try out for baseball? And he said, nah, I just...
On that day, and I passed it up.
So the very last family pictures that we had. Let's see, I'll show you another. I hate to get in front of you. Just some of the different ones, and the first family photo we had right after Chad. I mean, he was probably maybe 3 months old. This is a box that we have some of his things. We have his school books that he had in his car that night. We've got, you know, his hat, his rainbows. It's funny, his Speedo, because he swam. He hated these Speedos, hated them, and he still had to wear them. You know, just a few things. He used to do these, I forgot what these things are called, where you kick them around. So he had that wallet. Yeah, that's it. You know, some just different things. His baseball gloves that he played. What else is in here? Some of the cards, you know, that he collected. Like I said, he collected cards and stuff like that.
Let me be empty, oh, weightless, and maybe I'll find some peace tonight. In the
He was a fairly good athlete. He was very fast, but he wasn't the best. So we loved the sports. He loved the swimming. He also did some modeling as he became a young teenager. He did some modeling. He thought for sure he'd be the next Jim Carrey. He liked getting in front of a camera and hamming it up a little bit.
Chad was a really, really cool person. He's just very sweet, very kind, generous. He would never put anybody down. He's just a good person.
Chad always offered a smile to somebody, and I think the story that stands out the most to me is a story that my husband told me after his visitation, after he died. As the kids were coming through, and we had so many people for hours, we were standing there and people would come through and pay their respects and share memories, and we'd laugh and we'd cry. And if there was somebody there that we didn't know, my husband would look at them and say, you know, hi, how are you doing? We appreciate you coming, or whatever. And he would ask them how they knew Chad, whether it was church-related, school, sports. You know, we wanted to know how they were acquainted with Chad. And this one boy came up, and Bob asked him, you know, how did you know Chad? Were you a friend of his at school? And the boy kind of timidly said, no, I really didn't fit in with Chad's friends at school. So Bob kind of looked at him. He said, well, you know, I hope Chad never made you feel that you didn't fit in. You know, Bobby said it kind of made him a little bit nervous to think that Chad might not have been friendly to this young man. And he said, no, sir, not at all. He said every day when Chad would pass me in the halls, he would smile at me and say, hey, how you doing? Or some other, you know, just simple salutation. And he said there were days that Chad was the only person who spoke to me. And he said, I came tonight because I wanted you to know that it really made a difference in my life. He said, Chad will never know how much that meant to me. The next day, Saturday, Chad was at the game. I did try to call him a couple of times because there was something at the house that he needed to pick up, and I wanted to see him, you know, kind of, again, a second effort to try to get him to stop by the house. And, you know, he had his phone off, or during the game he didn't hear it, or perhaps he was ignoring me, I don't know, but I never spoke to him that day. That night, Dennis was gone, Megan was hanging out with her cousin in Camden, and I had Dawn at home, and she had a friend spending the night with her.
My friend Lauren, she was spending the night, and I remember my mom ran upstairs, and she said Chad's been in a car accident, and she said, we got to go now. I'm going to take you over to Grandma's house or Lauren's house, I can't remember where, but anyways, as we were driving down the interstate, I was sitting in the front with my mom. She was driving. She was driving pretty fast.
And a nurse on the other end called and verified that, you know, who I was and that I had a son by the name of Chad, which I confirmed. And she said, well, your son's been brought in after a car accident. Well, the first words out of any mom's mouth, you know, is he okay? And she said, well, they're in there assessing his injuries now. And so I asked a lot of questions, you know, was anybody else hurt? She told me that he was by himself. She said he had some head and chest injuries, and they were back there working on him and kind of assessing his injuries and working on him. And I remember asking her if Bob should stop by the house. I said, stop by the hospital. I said, Bob's on his way back from Myrtle Beach. Should I have him go and wait and be with Chad until I can get there? And she said, there's no need for you to drive two cars. Why don't you just wait and come together? You know, there's no rush. So there was nothing in that conversation that really made me feel like that it was an emergency or that it was a dire situation. So I got her information, hung up with her, and I called Bob.
I was at Myrtle Beach working on finishing his house, and his Uncle Scott and him were working on it during the summer every day, and then I would come down on weekends, and that weekend he had got a pass to go to the Carolina game, and so he asked me if he could be off. Of course I told him, yeah, you know, he worked all with me every weekend, and that day he was at the game and I was working on his house, and I was finishing up and driving back, and on the way back, we passed a wreck in Marion, and it was Cody was riding with me, and I said, that doesn't look like a Mitsubishi Montero Sport, does it? Because I knew that Chad was driving a Mitsubishi. Lisa called and said that he'd been in a wreck. And I said, tell me please it wasn't in Marion. And she said it was in Marion.
My brother, see, he went to a football game, a USC game, and he was riding back with a I wouldn't call him a friend, but he was riding back with another guy. And somewhere along the lines there was some sort of confrontation or something, and the guy that was riding in the passenger seat with him ends up getting out at a gas station, and my brother leaves that gas station, and we know that he went to a couple of other gas stations, and for some reason he didn't have any money to put gas in his car to get home. I don't know if he was a pretty careful guy, you know. I don't know if his friend took his money or if he lost it, or, you know, drinking, being careless, you know, things happen, but somewhere along the lines, he kicked that guy out of his car. You know, sometimes I think about people that steal things and how that can affect someone, and I have a lot of hard feelings. You know, I don't know what happened that day, but it could have been that the guy that was with him took his money. Knowing that my brother died, you know, just after 10 o'clock p.m. the night before, you know, everybody else knew. I didn't know. I remember my mom calling me up. You know, she's hysterical, crying. And she says, Chad's dead. You know, and they say that first step that hits you is denial. Well, I don't think there's much denial when you got your mom calling you, telling you your brother's dead. First thing I said is, was there any, you know, it hit me. And first thing I said was, are Megan and Dawn okay? You know, I try to, worrying about my sisters.
So I called my mother and I asked my mom if she would pick up Dawn, meet us there and pick up Dawn. And so we got in the car, and you know, it's interesting because it's a 12-mile span. And I always say that because for some reason, it's amazing to me, it's pertinent to me that in 12 miles, you know, maybe a 10-minute drive, everything changed.
Then I just remember her asking, you know, tell me what's going on, what's wrong with him, and then she just started screaming, no, 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 he's dead, he's dead. And at that point I just had my knees, my head cradled in my knees and just bawling my eyes out. My mom was probably going like 100 miles per hour.
He actually wrecked right in front of someone's home off of Main Road, and they come out, and it was a guy about my age, and he goes out and he sees my brother lying there, and he looks at him and he tells us that the last thing he saw my brother do, the last thing he saw was my brother smile. And I think about that. I think maybe when he passed away, maybe he was at peace. Maybe he was, through all that desperation and feeling alone, and maybe he was comforted.
It was him, and that he had died. They had tried to survive, bring him back, but he passed away. And then, we met in Lugoff. She came, and my parents and grandparents, we got together and drove straight to the hospital. And it wasn't a good thing, but he had died. He looked fine in the hospital. He looked like nothing was wrong with him.
I remember 5 things that he said. He said, your son was brought in after a car accident. He sustained massive head and chest injuries. And that was the first time I'd heard the word massive. Before that, it was some head and chest injuries. We worked on him for about 40 minutes. We did all we could do, but we were not able to save his life. And so, when I talk about distracted driving, needless to say, I was distracted whenever I got that information.